In the beginning, there was nothing, and this nothing was not a nothing that looked like something. It was not a black void. It was not an empty room. It was not even a breath waiting to be taken. It was truly, profoundly, deeply nothing. A kind of nothing that had no name, until someone decided to call this nothing chaos. Chaos did not mean disorder in those ancient times. No, in the earliest of ancient Greek minds, chaos simply meant the yawning gap, the gaping, open space, the thing before all other things, the beginning before beginnings, the space that was not yet space, the time that was not yet time. Chaos was there, or perhaps not there, since there was no. And that is already something to think about very slowly. Chaos was, and then from chaos came more things. Not very exciting things, but they came anyway. First, from chaos came Gaia. Gaia was Earth, but not Earth as a planet. Gaia was the Earth as a presence, a force, a form. She was solidness, the opposite of chaos, but she came from chaos. Gaia did not come with animals, or oceans, or skies, just the idea of ground, something stable, something still, something unmoving, something very, very still. So still, in fact, that it makes you feel still too, like you're sinking gently into stillness with Gaia. And then from chaos came Tartarus. Tartarus was the deep below, the deep beneath Gaia. If Gaia was the flat, unmoving ground, then Tartarus was the endless pit beneath that ground. Tartarus was not a place of fire or screaming. That came later, much later, in the boring future. In the beginning, Tartarus was just the concept of depth, just a place to fall into, a quiet hole, a slow fall, a forever fall that never made a sound, just down. Then came Eros, not the playful arrows of love arrows, not the small chubby child with wings. No, this Eros was the concept of attraction, the idea that things might, one day, want to come together, slowly, calmly, maybe to create, maybe not, but just to move toward one another. An ancient desire, but a very slow one, so slow that it took ons. Nothing rushed in those days, especially not love. Love was very patient, almost asleep. And then came Nyx. Nyx was night, a night without moon, a night without stars, a night so old it didn't even know what sleep was. But it made you want to sleep, because Nyx was shadow and silence. Nyx was the breath that comes just before dreaming. She moved without footsteps, without time. She was not evil. Just dark and quiet and endlessly still. When Nyx appeared, even Chaos slowed down. Nyx gave birth to many beings, some of them scary, some of them not, but all of them quiet. One was Hypnos, the god of sleep, the one who closed the eyes of mortals and gods alike. Hypnos did not walk, he drifted, he floated. He was the heavy blink, the deep yawn, the warm blanket of the mind, the dullness that makes you forget what you were saying, or thinking, or doing. Nyx also gave birth to Kanatos, the concept of peaceful death. Not the violent kind, just the slow, inevitable end. Like a candle going out after a long, quiet night. Like the last exhale of a story that was already finished. Thanatos did not frighten. He soothed. He ended the noise. He ended the need to stay awake. Now, back to Gaia. Gaia, being the earth, did not want to stay alone forever. So she gave birth to Uranus. Uranus was the sky, the heavens, the air above her, and Gaia loved Uranus. She wrapped herself in him, and he wrapped himself around her, every night, every day, though there were no nights or days yet, only endless time, endless cycles of stillness and silence. Together, Gaia and Uranus made many children, but those children were not like us. They were not even like the later gods. They were titans, big, ancient, silent. For a long time, they did nothing. They just existed, big and unmoving, with names like Oceanus and Hyperion and Thea and Rhea and Cronus. Names that sound important but take a long time to remember. A very long time. You can try to remember them, but you'll forget them again, and that's okay. That's the way of the Titans. Gaia also made mountains like Aurea. Tall, unmoving, silent mountains, and she made Pontus the sea, not the stormy sea, not yet, just the idea of waves, the gentle, slow motion of endless water, reaching and pulling, just like your breath. Back to Chaos. Yes, Chaos still existed, watching, not doing much. That was Chaos's way, watching others be born, slowly, quietly, watching things become things. Nyx had more children. Moros, the spirit of doom, but not sudden doom, the slow kind, the creeping feeling that someday, far away, something might go wrong. But not today, not yet, probably not ever, just the thought of it. And Eris, strife, but not loud strife, just the quiet tension between stillness and movement. the feeling that something might change. But then it doesn't. That's Eris at her calmest. Uranus, as we mentioned, was the sky, and he did not like his children. He pushed them back into Gaia, deep into the earth. She didn't like that. She asked one of her children, Cronus, to help. Cronus was time, or the beginning of time, but not ticking time, not clock time, just the idea that one thing might follow another. Slowly, step by step, the first steps of order. Cronus overthrew Uranus, but slowly, and after much waiting. Then he became the ruler. But he was not a great ruler. He was quiet. He did not speak much. He swallowed his children, all of them, to keep them from overthrowing him. That's the kind of slow, ancient fear Cronus had. The fear of being replaced, but not soon, not yet. His children were Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, and Zeus, all swallowed, one by one, until one, Zeus, was hidden away by Rhea, his mother, and raised in silence, on a quiet mountain, in a quiet cave, fed with honey and goat's milk, watched by nymphs and bees, until one day Zeus would grow strong enough to confront Cronus, but not yet. That would take a long time. Before that, the world remained ancient, primeval. Still, the primordials existed alongside the Titans, and the Titans dreamed of nothing, because they had not yet learned to dream. Ananke, the inevitability, she coiled with Chronos time in an endless spiral, wrapping the universe, tight, calm, circular, without end, without beginning. Eon, another version of time, unmoving, eternal. He looked forward but also backward, but never quickly. Hemra, the day, and Artha, the bright sky, came from Nyx and Erebus, darkness. But these were not bright lights, just the soft glow before the sun was invented, just the idea of clarity, dim and sleepy, and there were more, so many more. But their names sound alike, and their actions are slow, so you can forget them. Let them go. Let your mind drift past them like a lazy cloud. In this time before war, before drama, before even myths began to be myths, there was just existence, a slow dance of beginnings, a hush that stretched across the endless, not quite space, each name a whisper, each act a gentle motion, each god or goddess or concept just being, just like you, just like your body resting, just like your eyes almost closed now. This was the beginning. The stillness before the stories, the calm before the gods, the quiet cradle of the universe. It did not need heroes yet, or monsters, or battles. It needed silence and time. Time to sleep, time drift, time to let go. Because before the gods, there was nothing. And in that nothing, everything waited. And you can wait too. Wait and drift, and breathe and sleep. Before heroes, time before drama, time of Cronus. Cronus was a titan, one of the many, a child of Gaia, the earth, and Uranus, the sky. He was not yet the god of time. He was simply Cronus. He did not rule yet, not in the beginning. In the beginning, he waited. All the Titans waited. They waited in the darkness of Gaia, pressed deep into the earth by Uranus, who feared them. Uranus, their father, held them still, not out of cruelty, perhaps, but out of fear. Fear of being replaced, fear of change. So Uranus kept everything still. The Titans remained there, not angry, not sad, just waiting for a long, long time. But Gaia, their mother, grew tired of the stillness, tired of silence, tired of seeing her children trapped in her belly. So she decided to change things slowly, calmly, purposefully. She forged a sickle, not a sword, not a spear, a sickle, a tool meant to harvest, to cut gently, to slice across the neck of time. She showed the sickle to her sons, the Titans, one by one, but they all were afraid. Afraid of change, afraid of taking power, afraid of standing up, except for Cronus. Cronus was not brave, not yet, but he was curious, curious enough to say yes, curious enough to hold the sickle, curious enough to wait for the moment. So Gaia positioned him, and one night, when Uranus came down to embrace Gaia, as he always did, Cronus waited, and then he struck, not loudly, not with fury, but with inevitability. Cronus used the sickle, and Uranus was no longer ruler. The sky pulled away from the earth. The silence cracked. The stillness ended, but not quick. Slowly, bit by bit, Cronus had overthrown Uranus, and he became the new ruler, the Titan King, the first to rule over existence, but not over men. There were no men, not yet, only Titans, and the slow movement of myth. Cronus took his seat, a throne not made of gold but of power, of rule. He did not build cities, he did not sing songs, he simply ruled, quietly, without joy, without anger. Just rule. He married his sister Rhea. Titans often married siblings. It was not strange to them. It was quiet, normal, acceptable. and together they had children, many children, 6 to be exact: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, and Zeus. But Cronus remembered the prophecy. Prophecies are slow things. They linger, they whisper, they do not shout, they repeat themselves again and again. And this one said, one of your children will overthrow you, just as you overthrew your father. Cronus did not like this. He thought, and then he acted, not with violence, but with certainty. When each child was born, Cronus swallowed them, one by one, slowly, gently. He did not harm them. He simply kept them inside, in silence, in stillness, inside his stomach, inside the quiet. And so Hestia was swallowed, and Demeter was swallowed, and Hera was swallowed, and Hades, and Poseidon, all swallowed. But when Rhea was pregnant with the 6th child, Zeus, she grew tired of this pattern, tired of silence, tired of seeing her children vanish. So she sought help from Gaia once again, and Gaia gave her a plan. When Zeus was born, Rhea hid him. She wrapped a stone in swaddling cloth and gave it to Cronus. And Cronus, slow and thoughtless, swallowed the stone, believing it was his last child, believing the danger had passed. But Zeus was alive, and Zeus grew, far away, in secret, on Mount Ida, raised by nymphs, fed by a magical goat named Amalthea, surrounded by quiet, slow whispers of destiny. And while he grew, Cronus ruled, and the Titans lived. Their names became long and forgettable. There was Oceanus, who was the ocean; Hyperion, who watched the heavens; Thea, who shone with light; Mnemosyne, who was memory; Phoebe, who gave light to the moon; Tethys, who became rivers; Coos, Crius, Apetus. So many names, so many still silent gods. They did not war, they did not weep, they simply were, for a very long time, until Zeus returned. But not yet, not yet. He would come back. He would make Cronus release his siblings. He would rise up, but not yet. First the quiet before the storm, the stillness before the motion, the long sleep of the Titans, and maybe your sleep too. And now, after the slow rise of Cronus and the heavy fall of Uranus, we drift onward into the time of the Olympians. Not suddenly, not violently, but gradually, softly, as though the world itself took a long, deep breath and exhaled change. Cronus ruled, yes, and he ruled with quiet certainty. He ruled in long shadows and slow silences. But deep inside him, 5 of his children waited. They did not struggle, they did not shout, they simply existed. Inside, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, and the stone too sat silently in his stomach, an ancient trick wrapped in soft cloth. But the 6th child, Zeus, had been hidden away, not loudly, not quickly, but carefully, secretly, in the stillness of a mountain cave. On Mount Ida in Crete, a quiet cave, a sleepy cave, a place of goats and honey and gentle winds. There, Zeus was raised by nymphs, the kind of nymphs who speak softly and move even more softly. They cradled him in silence. They fed him drops of sweet milk and soft honey. They told him stories, but slowly, always slowly, never rushing, never raising their voices. A goat named Amalthea gave him milk, not just any milk, magical milk, dreamy milk, and from her horns came endless food, quiet food, the kind of food you eat and forget. And her horns, later, would become the cornucopia, the horn of plenty. But not yet. For now, she was simply a goat, a giving goat, a quiet goat. As Zeus grew, the whispers of destiny began to stir. But whispers take time, and destiny moves slowly. It does not shout, it nudges. And so, after years, long, gentle years, Zeus grew strong enough to return, to fulfill a prophecy that everyone had almost forgotten. Because the prophecy, like all things in these stories, moved at the pace of a very slow cloud. With the help of Gaia, or perhaps with the help of Metis, a titaness of wisdom, Zeus made Cronus vomit, not with force, not with violence, but with a potion. A calm, deliberate potion, one drop at a time, until Cronus coughed, and out came the stone.
Then Hestia, then Demeter,
Then Hera, then Hades, then Poseidon. Each child emerged, older than they should be, but still alive. And they stood beside Zeus, not shooting, not rushing, but standing, still, together. This began what would come to be called the Titanomachy, the war between the Titans and the Olympians. But even war, in the age of myth, moved slowly, like mountains grinding against each other, like the ocean deciding whether to rise. The Titans gathered behind Cronus. Some joined him willingly. Others followed out of habit. Oceanus did not fight. He stayed away, watching, flowing, letting time pass. The Olympians, the 6 children of Cronus, prepared to rise, but they needed allies. They found them. First, the Hecatonchires, the 100-handed ones, beings of overwhelming power, buried by Cronus in Tartarus, forgotten. But Zeus remembered. He freed them, gave them light, gave them breath, and in return they gave him thunder. Thing the Cyclopes, one-eyed giants, silent artisans, they too had been imprisoned by Cronus. Zeus released them. They forged gifts, not with rush, but with rhythm. For Zeus, they made the thunderbolt. For Poseidon, the trident. For Hades, the helmet of invisibility. And slowly, surely, the war began. 10 years. That is what the myths say. 10 slow years, not of constant battle, but of movement, of hesitation, of ancient beings wondering if anything ever truly changed. The earth shook. Sometimes the sky rumbled. Occasionally the Titans, heavy and old, stood tall. The Olympians, young and determined, moved swiftly but not recklessly. And then, after a long silence, the war turned. Zeus with his thunderbolt struck Cronus. Poseidon shattered the ground. Hades with his helmet moved unseen. And the Titans fell, one by one, slowly, unceremoniously. There were no final speeches. Just collapse. Cronus fell into silence, into memory, into the slow dust of myth. The Olympians had won, but they did not celebrate loudly. No parades, no feasts, just a new order, a quieter world. Zeus took the sky, Poseidon took the sea, Hades took the underworld. The others, Hera, Demeter, Hestia, remained above, watching, caring, feeding, guiding, and Mount Olympus became their home. Not yet a place of beauty, just a tall mountain, tall enough to be alone, high enough to see the clouds, quiet enough for gods. And so the rule of the Olympians began. But it began like all things in myth, slowly, with long pauses, with thoughtful gazes, with quiet breath. Zeus sat on a throne. He did not laugh. He did not rage. Not yet. He simply ruled. And the world changed, softly, gently, inevitably. Now that the Olympians had taken power, they did what all rulers eventually do. They worked, not with joy, not with urgency, but with quiet, divine obligation. There was no one else to do it, no one else to run the world. So the gods began to settle in tog jobs, and not exciting jobs, but necessary ones, tiresome ones, repetitive ones, the kind of jobs that sound grand in name, but in practice go on forever, just like time. Let us begin with Zeus. Zeus was king of the gods. That sounds exciting, but really it meant he had to make decisions. Every day, over and over, immortal decisions. He ruled the sky, but the sky does not change much. Clouds drift, winds blow. Occasionally, lightning strikes. He had a thunderbolt, yes, but he could not throw it every day. That would be exhausting. So most days Zeus sat on a throne, on Olympus, listening to complaints from other gods, listening to mortals pray, listening to Hera, his wife, remind him of the past. Zeus's job was judgment, not swift judgment. Long, tired judgment. He had to decide which prayer to answer, which hero to bless, which oath to enforce, which child to recognize. And he had many children, with many goddesses, with many mortals, all of them needing something, each child with a name, each child with a prophecy, each child needing attention. Zeus his side often, because his job never ended. Even gods, it seems, get tired. Then there was Hera, queen of the gods, goddess of marriage. She had a throne next to Zeus. Her job was not thunder. Her job was watching marriages. Endless marriages. She watched the oaths made by mortals. She punished those who broke them, especially unfaithful husbands, especially her own husband. Every day, Hera heard stories. He betrayed her here, he betrayed her there. Another affair child, another nymph. So she plotted, not quickly, but slowly. She made plans. She cursed mistresses. She tormented their children, not out of cruelty, but out of duty. Marriage must be honored, she thought, even if no one honors it. And so, her work continued, one vow at a time. Then there was Poseidon, lord of the sea. That might sound fun, but the sea is enormous, and it never stops moving. Waves rise, waves fall, fish swim, ships sink, storms begin, storms end. All of it Poseidon's responsibility. He stirred the ocean. He watched the tides. He calmed the tempests. He unleashed earthquakes when angered. But even his anger became routine, because being the sea meant being in motion, all the time, without rest, without thanks. Mortals blamed him when things went wrong, but forgot him when skies were clear. Poseidon brooded and worked, and waited for the next storm. Hades, meanwhile, ruled the underworld, far below, far from Olympus. He did not see the sky. He did not visit parties. He did not host banquets. He counted souls. He judged the dead. He placed them in meadows or in shadows, in Elysium or in Tartarus. He watched rivers flow. Lethe, Stitron, Cocytus, Phlegethon, each river slow, each soul slower. He did not smile, he did not complain. He simply kept working, forever, because mortals never stopped dying. Then there was Demeter, goddess of agriculture. Her job was even more repetitive. Wheat must grow, barley must grow, seasons must pass, rain must fall, sun must rise. All of it her domain, all of it her cycle. She fed mortals, but they rarely thanked her. They took their bread, they ate their harvests, and they forgot her name. But she kept working, because the fields do not stop. The soil waits, waits, and waits. Demeter watched, Demeter sighed, Demeter grew things, always quietly. And Hestia, the hearth, the flame, the quiet goddess of the home. She did not argue, she did not fight. She stayed in temples, in kitchens, in every quiet fire, every quiet home. Her flame never went out, but no one noticed her. She was the first to be born, the last to be remembered. But her job was eternal, to sit, to glow, to warm, to stay. And so she stayed. Each god had a job, and each job was forever. Aphrodite, goddess of love, spent her days managing desire, and desire is a messy thing. One moment mortals fell in love, the next they changed their minds. So Aphrodite worked overtime. She fixed broken hearts, then watched them break again. She caused love triangles, then resolved them, then caused new ones. It never ended. God of war paced in circles. He waited for battles, but battles came slowly, and most of the time he simply sharpened weapons. Again and again, Artemis wandered forests, in silence, hunting. But game was scarce, and sometimes she walked for years without a sound. Apollo sang, but even his songs grew old. He healed, he told the future, but futures blurred and healing became routine. Athena taught wisdom, but mortals forgot her lessons. Hephaestus built tools, but tools broke. Hermes ran errands, carried souls, delivered messages, a divine delivery god. Dionysus drank and danced, but even joy becomes tiring when it never ends.
And the temples. Ah, yes.
The temples, big stone buildings built by mortals, with pillars and statues and offerings, always offerings, bread, wine, olive oil, a lamb, a prayer, a question, an unanswered plea, and the gods received them again and again and again. Mortals asked for rain, asked for love, asked for justice, asked for victory, asked for health, asked for more, always more. And the gods, divine civil servants, kept working. Forever, without retirement, without holidays, without promotions. They were eternal, and so were their duties. Day after day, century after century, forever repeating like your breath, in, out, and again. No change, no rush, just the slow, steady ticking of divine responsibility. And perhaps, as you listen, you feel that too. The rhythm, the stillness, the long, slow tasks that never end, until one day they do. But not yet, not tonight. Tonight the gods are working, and you are drifting like a prayer into the clouds, into silence, into sleep. Long ago, before the great wars, before the Olympians built their throne nest, before even mortals learned to carve names into stone, there were creatures, not gods, not humans, something else, something slower, stranger, and bolder. They did not rush to exist. They did not burst into being. They crept into the world like long thoughts. I like drifting ideas that took shape very slowly. First, there was Echidna, half woman, half snake. Not beautiful, not terrifying, just Echidna. She lived in a cave that no one could find, even if they tried. Not that anyone tried, because she did not invite visitors. She slept more than she moved. She blinked slowly. She gave birth to creatures, and then slept again. Her mate was Typhon, a storm being, a monster, yes, but not the kind that charges, the kind that waits. He was the father of many things, not with care, not with love, just with presence. He simply existed, and things happened. From them came at Cerberus, the three-headed dog who guarded the underworld. He did not bark often. He mostly slept. Each head dreamed something different. One dreamed of bone, one dreamed of river, one dreamed of an endless nap. Then came the chimera, a lion, a goat, and a snake, all in one body. It did not know what it was. It moved slowly across the dry hills. It rarely roared. It mostly sat, confused and bored. The Sphinx came next. She sat on a rock. She had a riddle. One riddle, she asked it. Then she waited, for years, decades, centuries, just waiting, not because she needed to, just because that was what she did. She asked a question, and stared into the sun, waiting for an answer. Most creatures did not mind her. They simply walked around, or fell asleep near her feet. The Minotaur lived in a maze. But the maze was quiet. He wandered it slowly. Not angry, just unsure of where he was. He walked, turned a corner, walked again, lay down, slept, woke, and wandered more, not chasing, not escaping, just existing, like a dream you keep returning to. Then there were the harpies. Not fierce, not swift. They glided slowly through the air, their wings heavy, their faces tired. They did not scream. They did not fight. They circled the cliffs, watching waves, blinking slowly, feeling the wind. Then there were the Gorgons. The most famous was Medusa, but even she was tired. Her snakes hissed quietly, mostly to themselves, not out of fear, not out of anger, just conversation. She rarely moved. She rarely turned people to stone. She mostly watched the clouds and the moss and the sand, letting the moments slide by. The Cyclopes were giant. They had one eye. They worked slowly, forging things, not out of passion, not out of purpose, but because it passed the time. They made thunderbolts, then set them down, then made another, then took a nap. The centaurs wandered forests. They were half horse, half human, but fully lost. They did not run. They trotted. They paused at streams. They stared at leaves. They forgot where they were going, then turned around. The satyrs danced, but very slowly. Their flutes made soft sounds, almost not music, almost not noise at all, just a breath, a whisper. They drank from cups, then stared at the sky, then blinked, then did it again. Nymphs lived in trees, rivers, winds, but they were not in a hurry. They stretched their fingers into bark, into water, into mist. They hummed songs no one remembered, and no one wrote down, because the songs had no end, just long, long middles. Even Pegasus, the winged horse, spent more time standing still than flying. He flapped his wings occasionally, lifted a few feet, then came back down. There was no need to hurry. The stars were not going anywhere. The Furies wandered the underworld. They did not scream. They did not chase. They followed slowly. They did not speak. They simply watched, their eyes half closed, their fingers resting on stone. Even the Hydra, many-headed, many-limbed, slept more than it moved. When one head was cut off, two more grew, but very slowly, almost lazily, like a tree growing branches while napping. They were not creatures of rage. They were creatures of habit. They lived where they lived. They did what they did. Slowly, softly, strangely, and always. The myths tell of them with drama, with battle, with fire. But the truth is, most of the time they simply waited, existed, stood, slept, listened to wind, watched shadows, let centuries pass like clouds, like moss, like sleep. They did not care about temples or prayers or kings, and they were older than all of that, and they would outlast it, one breath at a time, one blink, one pause, another, and maybe now you too feel the pause, the slowness, the soft, strange world of things that have always been here, but never needed to move quickly or make noise, because not everything needs to roar. Some things just need to rest, like you, right now, or something else. Just tell me how you'd like to dream next. Somewhere far away on a cliff that looked like every other cliff perched a creature called a griffin. It had the body of a lion and the head of an eagle, but neither part seemed particularly concerned. It did not roar. It did not fly. It sat, very still, staring into the endless blue of the sky. No one knew what it was thinking. It might not have been thinking at all, just watching the air move, one breeze at a time. Below it, in a quiet forest, a dryad lived in a tree. She had lived in the same tree for centuries. She did not want to move. Even if the tree fell, she would stay. Her arms were bark. Her hair was leaves. She sighed sometimes, but only if the wind made her. Nearby, a nard buzzed in a stream. Her body flowed with the water, not fast, just in gentle ripples. Fish swam past her fingers. She did not grab them. She let them go. Sometimes she opened her eyes, then closed them again. There was nothing to do, and that was enough. Deep underground there lived a lamia. She had once been feared, but now she was just resting, her serpent tail coiled in circles, her head resting on her own shoulder. She did not whisper. She did not hiss. She barely breathed. The earth around her pulsed slowly, and she matched it. Breath out. Breath in, breath out. Above, in the distant skies, lived the Hecatonchires, 100-handed giants. But what does one do with 100 hands when there's nothing urgent to grab? They mostly draped them around mountains, letting arms hang over cliffs. They stretched and buzzed and scratched slowly at the clouds. They were not busy. They were not loud. They simply were. Even further, on the edge of reality, the fates spun their threads. Clotho spun, Lachesis measured, Atropos cut. But they did not hurry. Each thread took years. They spun slowly, measured slowly, cut slowly, sometimes forgetting where they left the scissors, sometimes forgetting which soul they were threading. It did not matter. All threads were connected in the end. They often fell asleep mid-stitch, dreaming of dreams, dreaming of yarn. In the misty valleys, some say a phoenix lived, but it rarely burned, it rarely rose. It simply waited, its fire a small ember in its chest, not a flame, not yet, not for a long time. And when it did finally burn, it burned gently, like the last candle before dawn, then returned to ash, then waited again. Waiting was its favorite thing. At the edge of the sea, the sirens once sang, but their song was so slow it barely reached the shore. Their voices stretched over hours, one note at a time. They sang not to lure, but to pass the centuries. Their songs had no chorus, no climax, just soft tones that drifted like fog. Ships didn't crash, they simply drifted past, and the sirens did not mind, because they would sing again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. Far beneath the ocean, there was Scylla, a creature with many heads and many teeth. But she was not hungry. She was bored. The heads often talked to one another, softly, like old friends. They did not fight. They did not bite. They whispered stories of waves and fish, some of which may not have been real. Across from her, her Charybdis yawned. She was a whale pulled in water. Let it go, then did again. Not violently, just rhythmically, like breathing, like tides, like sleep. Even the monsters of myth needed rest. They did not roar all day. They did not destroy everything. They slept, they sat, they floated, they forgot, not because they were weak, but because nothing lasts forever, not even rage, especially not rage. Sometimes Heracles passed by. He looked at them. They looked back. He kept walking. So did they, because some myths do not need endings, only long middle, soft middles, slow middles, like this one. Even the gods, watching from Mount Olympus, forgot about these creatures. They were too old, too slow, too irrelevant. And so they became myths within myths, stories no one told, except to the stars, except to dreams, except to you now. Because as you lie there, egg, still listening, you are beginning to understand the beauty of doing nothing, the power of being still, the truth of old myths that time always moves. But not everything else has to. You are the naiad in the stream, the griffin on the cliff, the phoenix not yet ready to burn. You are not late. You are not early. You are simply resting, just as you should. Long, long after the gods had yawned themselves into existence, long after chaos had softened into Gaia, and Gaia had sighed the titans into being, and even longer after the Olympians had squabbled and sleepily claimed their seats atop Mount Olympus, there came a time when mortals were ready to do something. Not great things, not urgent things, just things. But they didn't rush. They didn't burst into the world with horns and trumpets. They stretched. They blinked. They wandered into legend like people who took a wrong turn into a very quiet museum. This was the age of heroes, but not the fast-paced kind. No, these were slow heroes. Heroes with nowhere to be, and no reason to get there fast. Take Perseus, for example. He was born gently. His mother Danae had been quietly locked away in a bronze chamber by her father, not because of punishment, but because of an old sleepy prophecy. One of those vague, your grandson might do something someday, warnings that no one really understood. Zeus, feeling unusually golden one day, visited her in the form of golden rain, but not a storm, not a downpour, just a gentle, shimmering mist like the drizzle that falls when even the clouds are half asleep. Out of that golden visit came Perseus, blinking softly into the world. He didn't cry, he didn't shout, he mostly squinted at the light and went back to dozing. Eventually, not quickly, he grew up. He heard, in whispers of a task, a mission, a vague request from who didn't really expect much. "Bring me the head of Medusa," they said. Perseus nodded once, not because he was ready, not because he was brave, just because the wind was blowing that way and he had nothing better to do. And then there was Heracles, or Hercules if you're feeling Roman, but he didn't mind either name. He was born strong, of course, strong enough to wrestle shadows in his cradle, but even as a baby, he seemed more interested in stretching than in smashing. As he grew, people whispered about his strength. He could lift a mountain, they said. Heracles yawned. "I suppose I could," he replied, but it's sitting there quietly. Why bother it? Still, fate is patient. It gave him 12 labors, 12 tasks so slow, so repetitive, so oddly structured they could put an entire village to sleep just by listing them. And that was the idea, because Heracles wasn't in it for glory. He was in it because there was nothing else going on. The first task, the Nemean lion, a great beast, unbeatable, fought like iron, roar like thunder, or so they said. But when Heracles arrived, the lion was lounging beneath a fig tree. It opened one eye, then the other, then forgot why it was angry. Heracles removed his sandals, walked slowly up to it, and gave it a gentle hug. The lion blinked, yawned, and decided that sleep was more important than fighting. But back to Perseus, he had some divine help. Of course, the gods liked to be helpful sometimes, especially when things were going slowly and they were bored. Athena gave him a polished shield, but not one that gleamed too brightly. It was dull enough to avoid hurting sleepy eyes. Hermes gave him winged sandals, the kind that flapped only when necessary. Hades gave him a cap of invisibility, which he promptly lost for a while because he couldn't remember where he put it. Eventually he found under a rock, and so Perseus wandered toward Medusa. But he didn't march. He didn't gallop. He strolled. The journey took time, but he wasn't counting. He passed whispering rivers, trees that buzzed while standing, and clouds that forgot to move. Occasionally he would sit and wait for a direction to feel right. Sometimes he forgot what the quest was about. Eventually he reached the cave. Medusa lived there. Or maybe slept there. It was hard to tell. Inside, things weren't horrifying. They were just mossy, quiet, dusty in that forgotten corner of the library way. Medusa herself was half asleep, her snake hair curled around her like a sleepy cat. Only one eye was open, and even that was mostly squinting. Perseus didn't sneak. He just quietly walked in, held up his shield like a mirror, turned his head, and shuffled forward. She didn't scream. She didn't even hiss. She just sighed. A long, winding sigh, like someone finally giving up on finishing a book they started months ago. And then, softly, she turned to stone. No drama, no fury, just stillness. Perseus picked up her head, wrapped it gently, and wandered out again. And somewhere, far away, Heracles was still working on his labors. The Ocean stables were next. 1,000 cows. 1,000 days worth of done, but Heracles didn't mind. He found a river, redirected it slowly, like convincing a snail to cross a plate. The water mumbled as it passed. The cows looked on with vague interest. The stables were clean before anyone noticed, and Heracles, he lay down beside the river and watched the clouds try and fail to move. In this age of heroes, quests were long but not fast. Battles were fought but not loud. Winners were named, but very quietly. Because in the great myth of the world, after gods had napped and monsters had yawned and kings had slowly given orders, the heroes came, not with fanfare, not with fury, just with footsteps and dreams in their pockets. Before the first whisper of war, there was a long, quiet dinner, the kind where no one knows how long they've been sitting and the wine keeps refilling itself. This was the wedding feast of Peleus and Thetis, a mortal and a sea goddess. And all the gods were invited. Well, almost all. Eris, goddess of discord, was not. But Eris didn't yell, didn't scream. She just left a golden apple on the table, quietly, sleepily. An apple that read, "For the fairest." And then she wandered off. The gods blinked, yawned, thought about it. Then slowly Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite each raised their hands. Not sharply, not urgently, just lifted them. Each thought the apple was meant for her. But none wanted to argue loudly. Too tiring. Too much work. So they found Paris, a shepherd prince from sleepy Troy. Handsome, they said, but mostly available. He was dozing under a tree when they arrived, asking him to judge who was the fairest. Paris blinked slowly, looked up, then nodded, still half asleep. Each goddess offered a gift: wealth, wisdom, or the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Aphrodite offered the last. Paris barely listened, but beauty sounded soft and peaceful, so he handed her the apple.
Speeches, no fanfare.
A small shrug. Thus began the war, not with shouting, but with a sleepy choice. Helen of Sparta, married to King Menelaus, would soon drift away with Paris, or be taken, or wander off. The stories don't agree, but however it happened, the Greeks decided they wanted her back. Slowly, they began to gather ships, one by one. Over years, maybe even decades, it's hard to tell. Agamemnon led them, but not with shouting. with sighing, with meetings, with long plans and longer waits. And so, the 1,000 ships launched. The wind, almost unwilling, pushed them toward Troy. Not fast, just eventually. The Greeks reached Troy. Eventually. The sea had rocked them gently for so long, many forgot why they were even traveling. Some of the warriors thought they were on vacation. Others thought they were following birds. No one was quite sure anymore. But when they arrived, Troy was still there, sitting quietly by the sea, walls tall and steady like a city that had no plans to move. King Priam of Troy looked out from his balcony. He saw sails, many sails. But he didn't panic. He just rubbed his eyes and went back inside. Achilles, the greatest Greek warrior, had also come, but he wasn't in a hurry either. He brought his friend Patroclus, some armor, and a frown that took years to fully show up. He didn't want to fight, not away, maybe not at all. War was loud, messy, hot, and Achilles preferred naps. Odysseus was there too, clever Odysseus. But even he had trouble remembering why everyone was so upset. He spent most of the early days thinking about boats, wind, and sheep. Then someone mentioned Helen again, and he sighed deeply. Ajax, both big and little, were there, standing quietly in the sand. They weren't sure when the battle was supposed to start. So they just stood, for hours, for days, for years really. The war began slowly. One duel here, one shouted name there, then long pauses. Sometimes months passed between fights. There were feasts, speeches, board meetings about strategy. Many naps, even the gods got involved, but lazily. Athena supported the Greeks when she remembered. Apollo stood with the Trojans, but mostly because the sun was shining there. Hera, Poseidon, Ars, they all picked sides. But no one could remember which side was which after a while. And Helen, she watched from the walls of Troy. She yawned often. She sighed. Sometimes she wondered why they didn't just send her back, or have tea instead. But still, the war went on. Like a conversation no one could end. A lullaby of spears clinking and armor rusting. 1,000 names, all slightly similar. A slow tide of forgettable battles, drifting on and on. Achilles had been lying on the beach for years, not dead, justing. Resting, his tent flapped gently in the breeze, and every now and then he would stretch a leg or sigh in that dramatic way only heroes could. He was supposed to be fighting, he was supposed to be the greatest, but Achilles was sulking, because Agamemnon, the Greek commander, had taken a prize from him, a prize named Briseis. Not a treasure, not a sword, a person. Achilles didn't scream, he didn't charge into camp. He just got very, very still. Still like a rock in the sun. Still like someone who's fallen asleep angry and is pretending not to hear anything. The war went on without him, of course. Spears flew in slow arcs. Chariots rolled like half-dreamed thunder. But without Achilles, the Greeks began to yawn more, lose more, nap more. And then, Patroclus. Sweet sleepy Patroclus, Achilles' friend and the only one who could get him to mumble a word. He had an idea. He asked to wear Achilles' armor. Shiny, terrifying, famous, just to scare the Trojans. Achilles blinked once, twice, then nodded, very slowly. So Patroclus went out, wearing the hero's armor. And for a moment, the Greeks thought Achilles had returned. The Trojans stumbled backward. Spears paused midair. But then, tragedy stirred. Hector, Troy's prince, calm and slightly tired, faced Patroclus. They fought, not fast, not brutal, like two people sleepwalking through a disagreement. And in the end, Patroclus fell, quietly, gently, like someone finally succumbing to a long, drowsy dream. When word reached Achilles, it was like someone nudging a stone that had sat for years. He didn't shout, he didn't weep loudly, he simply rose. He put on new armor, forged by Hephaestus himself, god of fire and gentle craftsmanship, and he walked. The battlefield hushed, even the wind slowed down to watch. Achilles didn't run, he didn't charge, he just moved like a storm deciding to drift after all these years. And then, Hector and Achilles met, not like rivals, not like enemies, like two heavy thoughts finally colliding. The duel wasn't fast, it was long, thoughtful, like a chess match played underwater. Eventually, Hector fell, not violently, but like a curtain closing, and Achilles, still quiet, still heavy with sleep and sorrow, dragged Hector's body behind his chariot, slowly, dust rising, wheels creaking. But even vengeance didn't stir him much. That night King Priam of Troy came, very old and very soft, to ask for his son's body back. He didn't beg. He simply sat. He told Achilles he was tired too, that no one won in these stories. that everyone just wanted to go home, and Achilles, still wrapped in the hush of his grief, gave Hector back, not because it was right, but because it was time. Not rushed years, long, wandering years, years full of sights of half-hearted spear throws, of shields used more as dinner plates than protection. The Trojan War had become a sort of camp, a lifestyle, a place where no one quite remembered how it started, or why they were still there. The Greeks were tired. The Trojans were tired. Even the gods watching from Olympus were tired. Then one day, Odysseus, who was always thinking, slowly, had an idea. Not a new one. It had been stirring in the back of his mind for years like a pot on low heat. A horse. Not a real one, a wooden one. Very big. Very hollow. Very suspicious if you were paying attention. But people were too tired to question anything. The Greeks pretended to leave. They sailed away, very slowly, as if they weren't totally sure they wanted to. They left the giant horse behind, parked neatly outside the gates of Troy. The Trojans found it. They stared at it. They walked around it once, then twice. Then, in the sleepiest kind of group decision ever made, they decided it was probably fine, probably a gift, probably safe. So they rolled into the city. It took all day. The wheels creaked. The gates groaned. Children pointed at it and shrugged. A few people wondered aloud, should we maybe check inside? But no one really followed up. That night, Troy went to sleep, and inside the horse, Odysseus and others, yawning in the dark, they waited until the moon was high and the guards were fully asleep. Not pretending, not faking, just deep in dream. Then they climbed out. They tiptoed. They opened the gates. The Greeks came back, not with cheers, not with shouts, just a kind of wary determination. They were ready to be done. Troy burned, slowly, smoke curling up like bedtime steam. No one danced in victory. No one sang. It was more like a long, drawn-out exhale. Helen, the cause of it all, was led back to the ships, still beautiful, still mysterious, but more quiet now, like a story that had been told too many times. And so the war ended, not with a bang, not with glory, but with a collective yawn from gods, men, and myths alike. The Trojan War had been fought, and finally, it was over. It all started after the war that took forever. The Trojan War had lasted 10 years, but the last part, the part where they tried to leave, felt even longer. The ships were creaky, the sea was moody, and Odysseus, king of Ithaca, clever and tired, just wanted to go home. Not urgently, just someday. He boarded his ship along with other equally wary Greeks. The sails flapped lazily in the wind. The oarsmen dipped their paddles slowly, as if trying not to disturb the sea too much. They left Troy behind. Smoke still curled into the sky. But Odysseus barely looked back. He was already dreaming of home, of his bed, of the sound his old dog made when it slept beside the fire. But Poseidon, the god of the sea, had different plans. And even those plans weren't fast. First stop, the island of the sea cones. Odysseus and his men thought about raiding it, but even that felt sluggish. They loitered. They took too long. Reinforcements came. A sleepy battle followed, full of slow sword swings and shields that clanged like yawns. They left, eventually rocked by the waves. Then came the land of the lotus eaters, a place where people did nothing but eat dreamy flowers. Odysseus sent a few men to explore. They nibbled the lotus, forgot what day it was, forgot where they were going, forgot they were going anywhere at all. Odysseus had to gently drag them back to the boat, murmuring something like, "Come on, now. Let's remember we have a home." The sea stretched out, endless and swaying. They drifted toward the island of the Cyclopes. The sun hung in the sky like a lazy lantern. And there, in a cave, they met Polyphemus, a very large, very slow-moving giant with one eye, and very little interest in cleaning up after himself. The cave smelled like old cheese and wet sheep. Odysseus and his men got trapped. They sat in the dim light. Polyphemus blocked the exit with a rock the size of a mountain nap. He ate a few men, very slowly, chewing for hours. Odysseus came up with a plan, but he didn't rush it. He waited for night. He waited for drowsiness. He offered the giant wine, thick and heavy. The giant drank and slurred. Then, with the most unhurried movements, Odysseus and his men carved a stick into a spear. They poked it into the fire until it glowed. And then, very softly, very sleepily, they poked it into Polyphemus's eye. The Cyclops roared, but not in a sudden way. More like a bear being woken up from hibernation. The men escaped under the bellies of sheep, which trotted slowly through the cave's exit. Back on the ship, Odysseus whispered his name into the wind. Odysseus, son of Laertes, king of Ithaca. Because even bragging, he couldn't help being poetic. Poseidon heard him, grumbled, and decided this journey home would take a long, long time. And so it continued. More winds, more waves, more wrong turns. The stars above blinked, then dozed. Odysseus watched the horizon, still far, still moving, still not home. After escaping the Cyclops and making Poseidon grumpy, Odysseus drifted on. The sea was calm, a little too calm. The wind forgot where it was going. And the ship simply floated, not fast, not slow, just existing. Eventually, a small island appeared on the horizon, like a forgotten spoon in a very large soup. The island was Aea, which even Odysseus admitted sounded like a yawn stretched into a word. There, in a quiet house made of stone and herbs, lived Zeus, a goddess who didn't really like visitors but also didn't mind them enough to stop them. Odysseus sent some men to explore. They didn't come back. Eventually, he went himself, sighed, knocked on the door, and found Zeus stirring a pot of soup. She looked up. She blinked once, maybe twice. "Oh," she said, "more sailors." She had turned the others into pigs, not out of anger, just curiosity, or maybe boredom. Odysseus, holding a magical herb Hermes had given him for some reason, didn't turn into a pig. Zeus raised an eyebrow. "You're no fun," she said. Still, she let him stay, and so he did. For 1 year, yes, 1 full year, he sat in a robe. He drank wine. He listened to the wind outside. Sometimes he remembered Ithaca and said something like, "I should go," but then Zeus would say, "What's the rush?" and there wasn't one. Eventually, though, he really did want to leave. So Zeus, yawning, told him he'd have to visit the underworld first. "Just to check in," she said. "Speak to Tiresias. Ask about directions." Odysseus blinked slowly. "The underworld?" "Yes," she said. "It's just south of here, or north, or somewhere." And so Odysseus set off again. The wind picked up slightly. The sails fluttered like sleepy eyelids. The journey continued, as gently and endlessly as a dream. Odysseus, whose journey home was already the longest nap in literary history, now had to visit the underworld, not because he wanted to, but because someone said he should. That's how things went for him, mostly people suggesting things, softly, without urgency. His crew didn't complain, they barely blinked. They found a dark cove, where the sky met the sea and forgot to separate. Odysseus made a small sacrifice, not dramatic, just a bit of sheep, a little wine, some muttering, and the dead arrived, but not fast. They drifted in like mist, wispy, translucent, and unhurried. They spoke in sighs, in half-memories, in voices like wind behind curtains. First came Tiresias, the old prophet. He said, in a voice so slow it echoed backward, "You will get home eventually." Odysseus nodded. He had no plans that day, or the next 10 years. Tiresias warned him very gently about not eating the sun god's cattle. "Don't eat them," he whispered. "They are very sacred and chewy." Odysseus agreed. Maybe. Then came other ghosts. His mother, some walled friends, even Achilles, being dead. Achilles murmured as not as exciting as they say. Odysseus blinked slowly. Everyone seemed to be saying that. No one shouted. No one demanded revenge. No one had strong emotions. It was a kingdom of soft voices and floating thoughts. Odysseus stayed for a while, listened, nodded, stared into the grey. Then he left, not with purpose, just with quiet intention. Back to the ship, back to the sea, back to wandering. The wind yawned, the oars dipped, and the world faded back into mist. Odysseus, still drifting home like a feather on a breeze, found himself approaching a stretch of sea said to be dangerous, but not because of rocks or storms. No, the trouble here was musical. The sirens lived nearby, not screeching harpies, as later stories imagined, but rather two slightly tired singers who sat on a rock and hummed forgotten tunes. Their songs weren't thrilling. They weren't even fully songs, just long sighing vowels and soft syllables that never quite landed. "Oh, oh, 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 die suases," they moaned, like the sea stretching in its sleep. "One nu wo thiuings," they whispered. But they didn't. They had forgotten most of the knowledge they were supposed to tempt him with. Odysseus, careful and still very drowsy from his underworld visit, had been warned. So he asked his crew, equally sleepy, to plug their ears with beeswax. They did so slowly, yawning between each application. Then he tied himself to the mast, not tightly, just enough so he wouldn't drift off the ship while listening. As they passed, the sirens tried their best. "Turn aside, come here, or don't," they sang. "We have tiles or maybe snacks." Odysseus listened. The tune was kind of nice, a little off-key, like a lullaby sung by someone half remembering the words. He didn't struggle, he didn't shout. He just tilted his head a bit, curious but not committed. The ship glided past. The sirens watched him leave. Then one looked at the other. "Did we forget the chorus again?" "I think we did." They shrugged. Odysseus, still tied to the mast, stared at the sky and thought, "I wonder if that was important." It wasn't. Nothing really was. Not out here. Not on the endless, bobbing path home. After the sirens' soft singing had faded into the distance, Odysseus and his crew floated on, the ship moving at its usual dreamy pace, slow enough to let the wind forget it was blowing. Ahead, a new challenge waited. Or at least, it was supposed to. This part of the sea was famous for its danger. On one side, Scylla, a terrifying many-headed monster. On the other, Charybdis, a swirling whirlpool that sucked down entire ships, supposedly. Odysseus stood at the helm, arms loosely folded, eyes half-lidded. The crew napped nearby, occasionally adjusting the sail out of habit more than concern. As they approached the narrow strait, Odysseus squinted at the left. Scylla's cave. There, high on the rocky cliff, something stirred. A head peeked out, then another, then a third, but much slower. Scylla yawned. She had 6 heads, but only 3 were awake. They looked down at the ship. "Oh, a boat," one head muttered. "Should we eat them?" another asked. "Ah, I just woke up," grumbled the third. Down below, Odysseus pretended not to notice. He quietly guided the ship a little to the right, not too close to Charybdis, of course, but just enough to avoid bothering Scylla too much. Charybdis, meanwhile, was mid-nap. She wasn't exactly a creature anymore, just a swirling bit of sea with a mild burping problem. She gurgled once, hiccuped, then went quiet again. The water spun slowly, like a lazy spoon in an old teacup. The ship passed. Scylla nibbled the edge of a rock absently. Charybdis sighed in her sleep. Odysseus blinked at the calm sea and thought, that wasn't so bad. The crew didn't notice a thing. They were already dreaming of duller dangers and mildly interesting monsters. The great challenge of the strait had come and gone with a yawn, and the sea continued to rock them like a cradle that never stopped. In the gentle twilight of Greek myth, where everything had already sort of happened and not much was left to do, a man named Oedipus blinked at the sun and sighed deeply. He was on a road, or maybe near a road, or maybe a dream about a road. The details didn't matter anymore. Oedipus had answers to questions no one had asked yet, and a destiny heavier than his sandals. But even destiny here moved at a yawning pace. He was told that one day he would kill his father and marry his mother, but no one had said when, or how, or why. So, like most things in Greek tragedy, it just happened. Eventually, he left home slowly to avoid the prophecy. He met a man on the road, an older man who wouldn't move aside. They argued, but not loudly. They argued in long, thoughtful pauses. You move. No. You. I don't want to. Then I must. Then Oedipus killed him. Not quickly, not violently. Just, eventually, he reached Thebes, found a sphinx there. The sphinx asked him a riddle with a sleepy smile. Oedipus answered, yawning halfway through. The sphinx blinked, nodded, and crumbled into dust like someone who had been waiting centuries to be dismissed. The people of Thebes were so grateful, or maybe just bored, that they made Oedipus king. He married a queen named Jocasta. No one noticed right away, but slowly in scenes filled with long stares, soft sighs, and very measured monologues, the truth floated out like a fog. Jocasta was his mother. He had fulfilled the prophecy. There was some weeping, some gasping, but mostly there were long pauses and long, long speeches. Everyone took turns being sad, but in that very Greek way, noble, dramatic, and unhurried. Jocasta quietly left the stage of life. Oedipus removed his eyes, not with a scream, just a quiet gasp and a final mutter of, "I see now." Then he wandered. Not angrily, not quickly, just endlessly. People he passed along the road didn't ask questions. They just nodded and sighed and said things like, tragic, very, so much talking. And so, Oedipus faded from the story, not with a bang, not with redemption, but with quiet steps on a dusty road that had no ending and barely a beginning. Another tragedy, Another slow tale, another sleepy sadness. After Oedipus wandered away from the story, his children remained behind, each caught in their own thoughtful, long-winded misfortune. One of them was Antigone, a daughter with a spine of quiet steel and a voice made for slow, dramatic declarations. Her brothers had fought a war, a very slow one, over the throne of Thebes. Aethicles and Polynices, their names too similar to remember, had decided that taking turns ruling wasn't exciting enough, so they argued, then duelled, and then, eventually, they both died. It wasn't loud, it wasn't glorious. Just two brothers, sighing as they fell, one after the other. Thebes, ever tired, blinked and went quiet again. Then came a decree from Creon, their uncle, now king, a man who loved laws more than sleep. He declared that Aethicles would be buried with full honours, but Polynices left out to rot. No grave, no rest, no peace. Antigone did not scream. She did not protest with noise. She stood, tall and silent, and spoke slowly. He is my brother. He will have a grave. And that was that. She didn't plan a rebellion. She just picked up dust in her fingers and let it fall gently over Polynices' body like a lullaby made of earth. Guards caught her. Creon summoned her. They spoke back and forth, not with shouts, but with lengthy speeches. Everything was wrapped in metaphors. Everything took forever. Creon, the law is the law. Antigone, but what of the gods? Creon, I am king. Antigone, but I am human. And so it went. Eventually, Creon had her locked in a cave, not stabbed, not burned, just walled in, with enough time to think. A tragic fate very slowly unfolding, but tragedy in Thebes doesn't end with just one death. Creon's son, Haman, who loved Antigone, arrived too late. He sighed, he wept, he spoke in poetic sentences, and then he joined her. His mother followed. Creon stood alone, not roaring, just staring into the middle distance, as if regretting every decision and every monologue he had ever spoken. The chorus, always there, always murmuring in the background, shuffled forward and said something like, "Wisdom comes slowly, if it comes at all." Then they faded away again, into the grey folds of the stage. Antigone's story was over, but no one rushed to leave. They just sat there, breathing quietly, letting the sadness settle like soft dust on forgotten stones. Somewhere near the edge of Greek myth, in a palace lit only by fading torches and heavy thoughts, sat Medea, sorceress, wife exile and soon tragedy. She had once helped a hero named Jason win the Golden Fleece, not because he was clever, but because she was. She tricked dragons, charmed kings, and gave up everything for him, a homeland, a family, even her sense of rest. But now, years later, Jason had decided he'd like to marry someone else. A princess, of course. More power. A new beginning. Medea, he suggested she be reasonable, and Medea blinked slowly. She sat in her room and stared at the wall. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She thought, and thought, and thought. In Greek tragedy, revenge doesn't arrive fast. It walks, carefully, like someone dragging a very long cloak behind them. So Medea spoke in slow verses, long monologues filled with pauses and ancient words that no one quite understood anymore. She talked about betrayal, about gods, about women, about silence, about fury, not loud but deep. She said things like, "I gave him everything, he gave me nothing." The chorus, of course, murmured nearby, "Yes, sad, but perhaps don't do anything drastic." But Medea was far beyond advice. She brewed a potion, not quickly. She folded spells like laundry, whispered incantations to no one, the kind of magic that smells like old libraries and cold fire. Then she gave gifts to Jason's new bride, a crown and a dress. The bride put them on, slowly. At first, they shimmered, then they smoked, then they burned, gently, tragically, fatally. The palace didn't explode, it sighed into flame, but Medea wasn't finished. She looked at her children, her own, still, breathing, innocent. She spoke to them for a very long time. No one interrupted, even time paused. And then she did what no one believed she would, or could, or should. She ended them, and with it everything. Jason arrived too late. He shouted, finally, but the story was already over. Medea floated away in a chariot drawn by dragons, eyes dry, voice silent. The chorus stood alone. They looked at the audience, or the sky, or themselves, and said, sometime, "The gods do not explain." And they meant it. No lesson, no justice, just quiet devastation. And so the tragedy ended, not with thunder, but with 3 final breaths: sadness, stillness, sleep. At some point, the stories just slowed down, not with a bang, not with a final battle, but with a kind of soft forgetting, like clouds drifting too far to be seen. The gods, once loud and jealous and full of lightning, began to speak less. They stopped meddling in human affairs quite so much. Temples grew quiet. Priests nodded off during rituals. Statues gathered moss instead of worship. Zeus, ruler of Olympus, who once threw thunderbolts with theatrical flair, now mostly sat in his great golden chair and stared at the horizon. Hera sighed. Poseidon stirred the ocean just enough to keep it from going still. Apollo strummed his lyre with the same 4 notes, again and again. The myths didn't end because someone said, the end. They ended because people started telling new stories. Different gods, different heroes, different hopes, and the old ones, they just faded. Children stopped learning the names of all 12 Olympians. No one asked for guidance from Athena. No one feared the wrath of Ares. Even Hermes, once the busiest messenger in the cosmos, couldn't remember his last errand. Dionysus tried throwing one last party, but only a handful of satyrs showed up. They brought wine. They forgot the cups, and then a silence, not heavy, just complete. Somewhere on a quiet hill in Greece, someone picked up a pebble. It was smooth, warm from the sun, and strangely comforting. They didn't know it, but that pebble had once been part of a temple, or a statue, or maybe just a place where a myth was told long ago. They held it in their hand, looked at the sky, and felt peaceful. The myths weren't gone. They were just asleep, like everything else, waiting, inside the stone, in a far-forgotten corner of an old ruined city. Beneath layers of earth and ivy, a statue still stood, or most of it anyway. It had no head. One arm was missing, its feet were cracked, but the marble chest still glowed faintly with sun and memory. A bird landed on its shoulder. The statue didn't move, but inside something stirred. It wasn't a voice exactly, more like the echo of a thought. A whisper left behind from a time when everything had meaning, or at least stories pretending to be meaning. The whisper said, once, I was a god, not loud, not proud, just a murmur. The bird tilted its head. It didn't understand. It didn't need to. Once, people asked me things. They built things for me. They feared and loved and danced because of me. I don't remember why. The wind moved through the columns, the few that were left. There was a war, I think, or many wars. A hero with a name, a monster with too many heads, a boat, a labyrinth, a winged horse. Or maybe I'm mixing them up. It's all so soft now. The bird flew away, and the statue was alone again. But the whisper continued, faintly, like breath against the inside of stone. I was real when someone believed me. No, I'm a story. No, I'm sleep. And in sleep, I stay. A child one day will find a piece of this statue. They'll hold it in their hand and feel a strange quiet, not spooky, not magical, just old. And somewhere inside, the whisper will curl deeper into the stone and sigh, I am myth. I do not end! I only forget until someone remembers. And then I begin again. Somewhere, in a dusty museum no one visits on weekdays, behind a glass that never gets wiped quite clean, there sits a single, smooth pebble. No one really knows why it's there. There's no label, no spotlight. Just a quiet shelf, tucked between broken pottery and a fragment of something that might have been a sword or a spoon. It's hard to tell anymore. The pebble is pale, round, worn, but inside it is everything, all of it. The chaos before the world began, Nyx and her endless night, Gaia's slow breath, Zeus's bored thunder, Heracles' tired muscles, Helen's half-forgotten face, Achilles' sigh, Odysseus' endless detours, Medea's silent rage, Orpheus' quiet song. And even the gods who stayed behind when belief drifted elsewhere, they're in there too, all curled up, all dreaming, because the pebble is myth, not the shouting kind, not the epic kind, the other kind, the kind that hums beneath your pillow when your thoughts won't settle, the kind that lingers in lullabies, the kind that doesn't care if it's remembered or not, because it knows that forgetting is part of the rhythm. The pebble doesn't glow, it doesn't pulse, it just waits. Not for a hero, not for a war, just for someone someday to pick it up and wonder, what is this? And in that wondering, everything stirs again, not with a bang, not with a roar, but with the smallest whisper. Once upon a time,